Welcome back to Asian Voices. It is my pleasure to introduce an extraordinary woman, Dr. Thao, who shares her story with us of survival as a war refugee and her new identity as a Vietnamese American. Dr. Ha has turned her personal experience into her passion by teaching sociology as a college professor and in helping underserved communities raise awareness about social injustice. She also recently produced a documentary film that raises awareness about the circumstances many Vietnamese refugees faced in Texas who tried to start a new life in the U.S. after the Vietnam War.
I was born in Vietnam in 1973. In 1975, we left Vietnam as part of Operation Frequent Wind. So we moved around the U.S. For a few years, and we ended up in Houston, Texas in 1978, and that's where I grew up. You know, it was a little rough, learning the language. There was some bullying, there was a lot of racism, you know, the kids telling me that I'm a gook and chink and, you know, go back to your country and things like that. So, you know, we grew up with that, with that environment. You know, in Houston, there is a sizable Vietnamese population, and there were challenges with delinquency and gangs, and so unfortunately, I got caught up in some of that, and so it was a challenge to grow up in that time and era. And I ended up pursuing a doctorate in sociology, and I completed that at the University of Texas at Austin. And that's how I ended up working as a sociology professor. Education is so powerful. It's liberation, it's opportunities. It was my way out of my dark place. It gave me a brighter future. It gave my parents a sense of pride. So there are so many things that are wrapped up in education, and especially higher education. On campus, we have several programs that help disproportionately impacted student populations. We are very focused on equity and reaching out to populations that are often marginalized and shut out from the education system. And MANA is a program that is designed for our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander students. It's not exclusive to those students, and anyone can join, but we focus on empowering those voices and focusing on the experiences and the cultures of those communities, specifically because Oceanside has a very large Samoan population, and we want that community to know that we are here as a resource and a way for young people and even older people to get an education. We focus on mentoring. We focus on giving opportunities for them to visit universities, but also to give them a voice and that they can realize their own agency in how they can contribute as members of society.
Most of the people that lived here, that's what they did to make a living. They worked on the water.
To them, it was their livelihood that was important.
When the first Vietnamese came to Seadrift, they weren't really welcome into the community.
Our boys got killed up there, fighting them, and then they brought them over here to the States.
Seadrift is a documentary about the Vietnamese refugees who came to a small town in Texas called Seadrift. It's a coastal town off the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a fishing town. Fishing, shrimping, and crabbing. And so the documentary focuses on how the influx of refugees came there, what were some of the racial and economic tensions that arose from that. Seadrift is a town of about 1,300. All white folks, and so there was some conflict, some racial conflict. It led to violence, and it also prompted the KKK to get involved. And so the story follows what happened in the town, what was the situation with the violent confrontation and how the town resolved those issues. And we want to give voice to those who were there to tell the story of Seadrift. I wrote about the incident many, many years ago as part of my work on Vietnamese immigration in Texas. I was working with the Center for Immigration Research in Houston at the University of Houston and had written about the Vietnamese community. When I became a graduate student, I was very interested in telling our stories, our Vietnamese American stories, and I was fortunate to have the story published in a book called Asian Texans. And Asian Texans is a compilation of the contributions of Asian American communities in Texas. So I authored the chapter on Vietnamese in Texas. And so in that chapter is the story of Seadrift. Tim Tsai, who's the director of Seadrift, came across the story and said he had never heard of it before. He wanted to tell a story in documentary form, and he contacted me and said, let's make a documentary about this. And that was 7 years ago, so we completed it recently, and it is starting to pick up steam, and it's a very compelling story about refugees, the refugee experience. It's about reconciliation of dark events, and it tells a very holistic story beyond just racial conflict, right? There's a lot of humanity being told in that story, so I'm very proud of the documentary. I think it's very important for Asian Americans to have our voice out there, have our stories told. For myself, I feel that I've always been very mindful about what is my story, what is my community's story, how do we tell those stories, how do we encourage the next generation to be involved with that, because if we don't tell our stories, no one will. I'm Thao Ha, and this is my voice.